Hello everyone. Today we're going to change brake rotors and pads on a Peugeot 206. This is a 1.4 litre I, but it's common on most models. So first thing you're going to do is undo your wheel nuts while the wheel is still on the car, on the ground. And then we're going to lift the car and hold it up with a jack stand for safety. So now that I've lifted and secured the car, I can take off the wheel nuts and remove the wheel. Okay, so now here we have our caliper bracket, and we'll have to take off two screws that go in here that hold on the caliper to the bracket. So it's a 13mm socket. You can just use a ratchet. Usually they're not too hard to take off. You can always put some penetrating fluid here and there before you do it if they seem really hard, but they should come off easily. Alright, when they're removed. And now, since the brakes were in pressure against the disc, we shouldn't be able to take it off straight away, but yes, it comes, so that's okay. If it was to be a bit stuck, you can pull it towards you to push the pad into the piston, or make a lever action here in between the pad and the disc, but really be careful not to scratch the disc if you're not going to change. So this comes off like that. Here you can see the piston. I'm gonna put it somewhere here for now. Just make sure you don't let it hang by the hose, because you can damage it. So you can hook it up with a bit of wire to the spring, or put it on something on the ground. Or here I have the wheel underneath, so I can put it on. Just don't let it hang. Now we can see the pads on both sides. They should be pretty easy to take out. Yeah, I can even do it by hand. You can also lever them a bit by these little metal things. Same here, you can do it like that to take them out. So now we still have the bracket. I think we can take the disc off without taking this off. I'm going to check that right now. To take off the disc, you'll need a little Torx bit like that. It's T30. Put the car into gear if you want the disc to stand still. These screws are just to help you put the disc in place while you're mounting it. It's not, they don't hold the disc at all. It's the wheel nuts that take care of that. So we'll see if we can take it out. No, we can't. So we'll have to take off the bracket. Don't worry, it's not complicated. Two screws we'll have to take off. They can be quite hard, so before you start you can put some penetrating fluid on them and leave it on for a while. I know they're going to come, so I'm just going to do it straight away. So you'll absolutely need a T55 Torx bit to do that. Make sure you have that piece before you start, otherwise you won't be able to. You can turn the wheel outwards like we did, because you might need to put something, an extender on your key, to make your life easier, because it can be pretty hard. So I'm gonna just see if I manage like that. Yes. Okay, no problem for that. For me, this is the best solution, to use an extender. If you didn't have one, you can also use a hammer and hit on your key until it untightens the screw, but it's not the best option, especially if you're using a ratchet like this. So now you can just undo them, and here is the bracket. So this one's pretty clean because we had a go at it not long ago. Now I advise you to give it a good brush with a steel brush here and there where the pads are going to be in, and yeah, a bit all over the place. Just be careful of these little boots, not to damage them. Also check if they're not stuck. They have to move freely. If they're stuck in a position, that means you'll have to open them up and grease them. Now you can take off the disc just like that. Same thing for here. You can go at it with a steel brush to make sure it's nice and clean before putting the new disc on, and make sure always the fittings are also clean. Now we're going to put the disc back on. So this one, as you can see, it's just the steel surface. Some are painted with a matte grey paint. The ones that are painted, you don't do anything, it will just wear off during the first breakings. And the ones that are steel like that, you have to take off. Well, you don't have to, you're not going to have any problems if you don't, but it's better to take off the protection that's on it. It's like sort of plastified grease. So just use some brake cleaner and that will dissolve that protection. It's just to avoid rust during while the pieces are on the shelves. So now you align it with the little holes we had for these two screws. Just put them back on. So now we have to push the piston back into its housing before we put the new pads, because otherwise there won't be enough space. So for that, a simple way is just put an old pad, get a C-clamp like that, put it on, and just wind up the clamp until the piston goes in. You see, it's going in. That should be enough. You can also use a big set of pliers if you don't have a C-clamp. Just make sure not to damage anything. And there are of course specific piston pushers, but this is a simple and cheap and easy way to do it. I'm also gonna brush off all of the dust, the pad dust that's on here. Avoid breathing that, it's not very good. Okay, now we're going to put the bracket back on. Now you have to tighten them up really firmly, but without an extender, only with the normal length. Make sure they're nice and tight, but don't try and go too far. That's good. Now we're going to put the pads back on, the new pads. Something I like to do when I put new pads on is to give them a bit of a sanding on the edges to make them less rough, and especially the ones the front and back, and just give them a little bit on the surface to start the bedding process. Alright, so do that on each one. I think there were little clips, there's new ones, so put the new ones on. Take an old pad as an example. Like that. Make sure it's the same. Put some copper grease everywhere where the pads are gonna be in contact with something. So just on these parts so that they slide nicely. Copper grease because it's high temperature grease. Only use high temperature grease. You also have a graphite paste or ceramic paste you can use, but it's better not to put anything and then a grease that won't hold up temperature. So you don't have to put much. Don't put some on the disc, of course. If you do, just take it off with the brake cleaner. To put them on the right way, there are two little marks here. This one is a short one, and this one's a longer one. So the short one goes up. And just pop them back in. Like that. And do exactly the same thing on the other side with a bit of grease here and there. Now to put the caliper back on, I'm also going to put a bit of grease on the piston and on these parts, and that will avoid any whistling or squeaking noises on your brakes, because it's the vibrations between the pads and the other parts that make these noises. It's not the pads and the disc. It can be, but that's more like a bit of dust and it will go away. But if it always does these noises, it's because there is some vibration somewhere. Alright, and then just make sure these things are in the right way, otherwise it's just not going to go on. Yep, and just slide it back on like that. And then you can just screw it back on. Alright, so you're almost done. You're gonna have to give the brakes a bed-in period for the pads to adapt to the disc. So during that period, avoid doing heavy braking. Brake as you would usually, but just don't do really heavy braking or long, sort of weak braking, because you can glaze the pads and then you're good to change them again. Also, giving a bit of sandpaper on the surface will help that bedding period. Alright, same thing for these, nice and tight, but don't go too far. Alright, once you've done both sides, you're going to go in the car, press the pedal until it becomes hard. Always do that before you take off on the road, because since you push the piston back in the pads, there is some space and there's no braking. So press the pedal until it becomes hard, then open the hood and check your brake fluid level. With new pads, it might be over the maximum. If that's the case, take a syringe and take some fluid out. Otherwise, just check the level and make sure it's at the in between the max and the minimum. Alright, so you're done. So as you can see, it's a pretty easy task. Anyone can do that really, and it will save you quite a bit of money. So I'll say have a good brake change, and I'll see you next time in another video.